night long, he tells me.
Thank you guys for coming. Who was here at 10 o'clock? Someone was here before the doors opened, they said. Was it one of you guys? Was it you? 10:15? I'll count that. Here, this is for you. So what we're going to do today is I am going to speak a little bit about the book. That'll take me maybe 15 minutes. From there, we'll go to a Q&A. So whatever you guys want to know, be thinking of questions. There are rewards for those who ask questions, so be thinking along. And then I've got a short reading that I'll do for you. Altogether, this probably will take around an hour. From there, we'll go to the book signing, okay? So, Words of Radiance. I am really excited for you guys to be able to hold this book because this has gone through, it's been a long process getting this book in your hands. I started writing my very first novel when I was 15, and this book was awful. It was terrible. It was a really, really bad ripoff of Dragonlance, okay? Yeah. But there was one cool thing about it. One of the characters was the brother of the king, and the king got assassinated in the first chapter, and the brother was left in this really terrible position where he had a feeling his nephew was going to be a bad king, and he had these instincts that said, I should seize the throne for the good of the country. But yet I don't feel right doing that out of love for my brother who wanted his son to be the king. And this conflict became the central conflict that over the years developed a character in my head. I never finished that book I started when I was 15. But years later, this character was itching at me, and I had to write a book about him. The time I finally wrote the book was in 2002. Now, the path between me and 1991 starting my first book and 2002, there's a lot that went on in there. I was actually, by 2002, working on my 13th novel. I had not sold any of them yet. So you can imagine my family's consternation. My mother was constantly calling my father and being like, I don't know what's up with this kid. He was supposed to be a doctor, and now he's been writing books. And I was sending out novels, but they kept getting rejected. I kept getting told they're too long. Yeah. And the other big comment I heard was, write them more like George R.R. Martin. Because he'd just gotten big. It was the late 80s, or late 90s when I was submitting many of these.
Thank you for not doing that.
So I was in this weird position, right, where I was about to start my 13th novel, and I was not published. I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Everyone tells me to write my book shorter, and I had this sort of crisis where my end decision was, I don't care what they say. I'm writing these books because I love to write books. I'm not going to write what they tell me to, and I'm going to write a book twice as long as the ones they're rejecting. I've been writing books at 200,000 words, and I wrote one at 400,000 words. And I put all the awesome stuff into it I wanted because I love the epic fantasy genre. I discovered it when I was 14. I discovered reading, and it made a big difference in my life. And I followed this genre for many years, and I started to feel, as many of you who might be writers might feel, when something is done in a way that you don't like, you want to do it right your way. And that's what Way of Kings was. It was me saying, I want the fantasy genre to push its world building a little further. I want the fantasy genre to explore things that it's not exploring right now. I want the magic systems to be cooler than they are right now. I can only say that because fantastic writers were writing whose shoulders I was allowed to stand on. But particularly in the late 90s, I felt like a lot of the books that came out were clones of either George R. Martin or Robert Jordan, and were not kind of exploring their own territory. And so, as much as I respect Robert Jordan, I wanted to do my own thing. And Way of Kings was me doing my own thing, was me just kind of proverbial flipping the bird to the entire industry, right? So I finished this enormous book in 2003, And about a month later, an editor calls me and wants to buy my 6th book, Elantris. After I had thought, I'm never going to get published, I'm ignoring the industry, I'm ignoring what's smart, and I'm writing this weird thing anyway. And so he wanted to buy Elantris, and he said, what are you working on right now? I want to read that. So I sent it to him. And he called me back terrified of this book. He's like, artwork? You want to put art? I don't get this artwork thing. It's huge. Can we cut this? It needs to be like 5 books. And I actually told him, you know, I sent this to you because I want you to know what I'm going to do someday. I don't want to do this book because as much as the setting for Way of Kings was awesome, as much as Dalinar had worked out perfectly, the book actually didn't work. There was something wrong with it. And this is a weird thing for me to talk about because I teach a lot of writing. I have, for those who are aspiring writers, if you didn't know, I have a podcast called Writing Excuses. You may want to look that up. You can play it through your browser. It'll be very helpful. I also post my lectures, my writing lectures online. I used to be a professor. I don't have time for that anymore, but I kept hold of one class, how to write science fiction and fantasy, which I won't let them take from me. And so I teach that one night a week, actually Thursday nights. Howard Taylor, my good friend, is teaching it for me right now. And I post all those lectures on my website. So if you're an aspiring writer, you might find that useful. But I talk a lot about writing. I feel like I've figured out some things about writing. I can talk about how to make, you know, a character that the reader will feel like they're alive and they'll sympathize with. I feel like I can talk about the different types of plot archetypes. The problem with all of that is, you can talk about all that stuff all you want, and it's important. They're good tools, but there is something more important than all of that you need in a book, and that's the thing I can't explain. There's some sort of, pun intended, magic that goes into a creative work. There is something that is a piece of you and part of the experience that brings this all together and makes it come alive. There's one other thing it needs, but I'm not going to tell you what that is yet. But this thing, this magic, it's just, you know, I'll tell my students, here's a great plot, here's how you write some characters, and then, by the way, you need to add your own individual genius to make this thing awesome. And I don't know what to tell you about doing that. You just have to explore it yourself. And sometimes it means that even though all the pieces come together, a book doesn't work. And when that book doesn't work, I don't release it. And it's kind of like, you know, trying to explain the difference between sitting and playing a piece on the piano and having one of those transcendent performances where it all comes together and for a moment it is just working beyond your ability even as a musician to understand. And that didn't happen for Way of Kings, the 2002 version. I wasn't sure why. I was pretty sure there were some things skill-wise I hadn't done, but I didn't know what else was wrong. So I put the book aside, and instead I pitched to my editor the Mistborn series, which I pitched to him, actually. If you aren't aware, I pitched to him. I said, I want to do a series which has an epic fantasy trilogy, then skips forward and has an urban fantasy modern-day trilogy in the same world, where the magic is still there, and then skips forward and does a science fiction series where the magic has become the means by which space travel is possible. Because I'd never seen that done before, and that kind of broke my editor's brain. It was really cool. Whenever I tell him about one of these things, his response is always, wow, you're ambitious. And so I did the Mistborn epic fantasy trilogy. Which, by the way, as an aside, Alloy of Law is not the second trilogy. The second trilogy is 1980s level technology. It's kind of, I pitched it to my editor as Tom Clancy's spy novel with allomancers. And I will do that someday. Alloy of Law and its sequel, which I am working on, are things that are happening in between because I realized I wasn't going to be able to get to that second trilogy for a long time, and I didn't want people to forget about the Mistborn series, so I wanted to explore an interim stories. And so we're going to do some more of those. But anyway, so I pitched that. I worked on Mistborn, but during this whole time, I started reworking my entire outline for the Stormlight Archive. And a lot of very interesting things, at least academically, happened during this time when I was working on this book. I spent a lot of time studying the epic fantasies that I loved, listening to writers talk about writing epic fantasies, trying to identify some of the things that make epic fantasy awesome, some of the things I think we take for granted that should change, such as some of the world building, and some of the things that maybe are foibles of the genre that don't need to be foibles. I often say I have an advantage over Robert Jordan in that I've read Robert Jordan, right? I have the opportunity of having read fantastic writers who came before me and seeing what they said about their fiction. And it seems like that writers experience two main problems in a big epic fantasy series. The first one was they run into this problem where the books mid to late series start to blend together, where the reader and the author even has trouble distinguishing one from another. The book just kind of ends and then another one starts. And this is related to the other problem, which is the number of the cast of characters ballooned to the point that talking about writing a book, you can either like touch on each of them a little bit, or you can touch on a couple of them a lot. And either way, it's unsatisfying because either you're dropping half your characters or you're not getting a full story for any of those characters. And this runs into the genre. Now, this is a natural outgrowth of this wonderful genre that I love. It's big, it's expansive, it's immersive. It has all kinds of awesome things going on in it. But I thought, can I build my series in such a way that I avoid some of these problems? And so I started developing this idea for a 10-book series where it's 10 books based on 10 main characters with the 10 orders of Knights Radiant, and each book would contain a deep flashback sequence from one of the characters would relate to one of the orders of Knights Radiant, so that we kind of had a soul and a focus for each novel. So when you pick it up and you're like, oh, which one was book 4 again? Oh, wait a minute. Book 4 is Eshonai's book. I know which one that is now. I can kind of, I know which order of the Knights Radiant was focused on in there. It gives each book its own individual identity. I actually plotted the series, for those who want to know, as 2 sets of 5. There'll be a 5-book arc dealing with the characters introduced in the first couple of books. And then we will end and take a break, and it'll be about a decade, probably, maybe a little longer, not in my time. World time. Yeah, this guy about had a heart attack. In world time, maybe a decade or so, and then we will come back and we will deal with what I'm calling the back 5 books, which deal with characters who are very important to the story, but are only side characters in the mainline books. So this is where you see me delving a little bit more into some of those stories. And I built all of these. I built their flashback sequences. I am an outliner. I have to know where I'm going before I can write a book. So I actually started work on the endings. I've written the last chapter of book 5 already, and all of this stuff in order to know where I'm going for this series. And this I felt would help me with one of the problems, which when I was working on the original Way of Kings in 2002, it spiraled out of control like from chapter 1. Which is a really bad sign, right? When, most authors keep it controlled. Authors who are better writers than me kept it control until later in their series, and I'm going crazy in book 1. I realized I needed to focus in. I needed to really rebuild my series and focus it on these main characters. And so this was working really well. Then something happened to me, completely unexpected. I spoke on a previous tour about this in depth, so I won't go into it now, but the Wheel of Time dropped on me like a freight train. Unexpectedly, due to a phone call one day from someone I didn't at the time know and had no expectation of hearing from. And writing the Wheel of Time books was like being thrown into the deep end, right? Except I've been joking, it's more like being thrown into the Atlantic Ocean with chains on my feet and the boat sails away. Right? I had to learn how to swim really fast, and I could no longer afford to be bad at juggling large numbers, a large cast of characters and multiple plot lines and things like this. And those years working on the Wheel of Time books, particularly the first one, I grew faster than I had since I had started writing my first book. And it transformed me as a writer. It made me much better. People like to ask that question. What did you learn from the Wheel of Time? I learned how to juggle multiple plot lines. And the other thing is a lot more personal. I learned much better how Robert Jordan approached doing individual characters, because he was good at both of these things. He was good at the single viewpoint where you learn to know someone right in that scene, and he was good at this large cast. And juggling all of this, I feel those are two things that I learned. I got done with Gathering Storm, and I called up the publisher, Tom Doherty, and I said, I can do the Way of Kings now. And he said, don't you have some things on your plate right now, Randy? We just decided we need to split the books into 3. You know, we had a lot to do. I said, yes, I do have some things on my plate, but I need to write this book because the spark is there, the magic's there. I can't describe it, but I need to do it. It partially came from a big revelation relating to one of the characters, which I'm not going to give you specifics on right now because it gives a spoiler for the first book, but there is a character who in the 2002 version made a decision, the easy decision, and I needed to have him make the hard decision instead, and it flipped the entire book on its head. Bridge 4 was not in the 2002 version. They were in a different book called Dragonsteel, which is actually the rewrite of the book I started when I was 14. So it was Dalinar's original book. I stole him out, and then I stole Bridge 4. So that book doesn't have much left in it. It's awesome. I'll just warn you. People ask me, can I read that book? And I'm like, there's nothing left in that book. It does have Hoyd's origin story, which is the cool part that's left. And someday I will rewrite that book, focused more on him. But I needed to make this decision. I sat down and I wrote this book, and then I was left with a conundrum. And this brings us towards Radiance. I knew that if I released this book, The Way of Kings, in 2010, when Tor wanted to release it, I would not be able to get back to it for probably 3 years, to that series. And I didn't want to do that to people. But at the same time, I did not want to have the Wheel of Time fans have to wait any longer for their ending. We just announced we're splitting the book into 3, and then we announced that I'm writing another book. They're like, come on, it's happening to us again. 20 years from now, we'll get our ending. I'm like, no, I want to get you your ending. And so I told Tom I didn't want to stop between Towers of Midnight and A Memory of Light to write another Stormlight book, but that meant you guys got left waiting. Oh, hi. And I should say hi to you. Yeah. I didn't want to do this to you, but it looked like the only thing I could do. So I want to first off thank you. Thank you guys for waiting. 3.5 years for the sequel. You will not have to wait that long again. I know you are very patient people. My goal is to have, I can't do these every year, but I think I can do them every 18 months. So my goal is to have the 3rd one out for Christmas time next year. So I'm going to start writing that this summer. So you can watch the progress bars on my website, and we can see how that happens. That is my goal. We'll see how that works, but I think we might be able to pull that off. Which means that the sequel to Alloy of Law is getting pushed back to after that, because I didn't want to get in a habit that the Stormlight books come out that have that long of a delay between them. So I will be doing the next one of those later. For those who are curious, the book of mine that's coming out next will be Firefight, the sequel to Steelheart. That should be December or January. The book is done and turned in. And then I'm going to, between now and July, I'm going to write the sequel to The Arithmetist. And then I will go back into Stormlight. And this is how I work as a writer, as an aside. I really need to be jumping projects. It's how I remain creative. I can't usually do something that's too similar to what I've just finished. I have to do something very different after I finish a book. It's just how I work. This is where the Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarian series came from in the first place, was me discovering this about myself. So anyway, we get to this book. Finally, The Wheel of Time is done. The last book comes out. My editor calls me and says, I know you're working on the Stormlight Archive next book. I need to know the title so we can start putting it in the marketing material, like, you know, the catalogs that the booksellers get and things like this. And so I said, oh, this is great. Let me tell you about it. I've named all the books already in my outline. They're all named after in-world books, which is the pun on the idea of the archive. The Stormlight Archive is a group of 10 books which are referencing 10 books in world. I thought that was really fun. And each of them are going to be thematically important to the book. And the book that the second one's named after is this book that Shallan is given at the end of the first novel. It is a book with all blank pages. The idea being that this is a book for a scholar to fill with knowledge. But it is a book metaphorically that can never be filled, because knowledge, you know, you can never know everything. And the true mark of a scholar is someone who's always looking for more knowledge to put in that book. And therefore the book is called The Book of Endless Pages. Right? And I said, so we're going to name the second book The Book of Endless Pages, and my editor laughed at me. Now, yeah, I had not realized, I promise you, until that moment, I've been working for like 5 or 6 years with this book, named this in my head, that would give a lot of ammunition to reviewers who pick up a 1,000-page book and say, the Book of Endless Pages, you say. It certainly is. And so, from that moment, I realized I needed to change the book title. Now, this is weird because it is hard for me to change a book title, particularly one that I've thought of a certain way for a long, long time. You know, The Way of Kings had been named The Way of Kings since about late '99, and there's no way I could ever have changed that book in my head. It's just too hard for me. The momentum was there, the spark was there, and beyond that, I need to, for the consistency, work the book that is the title into the world as a book that's important to that book. And having to change the title meant that I couldn't use the Book of Endless Pages, though that will be in-world important at a later point. I had to come up with a new one. That was so hard. Like, those 3 words on the title were the hardest 3 words for me to come up with in this book. And it's so silly to talk about this, right? Because a title, it's 3 words. It shouldn't mean that much, but it did. And I spent months beating my head against the wall, trying to come up with a title. So it's a little bit surprising to me that you actually have this book right now. The title didn't come to me till right at the end. And it was when, as you're reading the book, you may notice a point where certain words are very important. And finally, I had my title. It was one of these things that brought the whole book together. It meant I needed to do a lot of revising in order to make the soul of the book work. But I was able to call my editor and say, I have a title. He's like, finally. They've been setting out, catalogs to say, Untitled Sanderson Project, and things like that. And I was finally able to start telling fans what the book was without them snickering. And we now have our book. But I want to mention, I mentioned earlier, there's one other thing that a book needs. It does need that spark that I can't really describe. But the other thing I can describe, because what I love about fiction is that fiction is a participatory art. When we view a film, I love films, but when we view a film, a completed narrative is presented to you, a completed vision, and we experience it, we view it. You are not viewers of a book, you are participants. I can do about 3/4 of what needs to be done. I write a script. Then when you pick it up, you add how the characters sound, the details of what they look like, the details of the plot, the things that don't happen, that happens in between the pages, as we say. When I was a reader, one of the things that made me a reader was the ability to look at that page and imagine what else was going on in this world, what other things the characters were doing. I started inserting characters. This became a theme for me. I started inserting them in my own books. But this whole idea is that I sincerely believe that my art doesn't live until you make it live, until you experience this, that my book is not done until you read it. And you create in your mind your version of it, which is why I don't mind how the character names are pronounced. In your version, they're pronounced however you want them to be. In my version of the Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders books, the dragon names are these unpronounceable sounds. They're just like, I never sounded them out. I'm like, no, you can't say a dragon's name. It's just a thing that enters your head. Whatever you do to the books is yours. And so I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for giving me that last part. Thank you for giving to my books your imagination to make them live. Thank you for picking up Words of Radiance. I hope you enjoy the ride. All right, now comes the dangerous part because, oh, your hand went up first. Oh, you were really excited to ask something. So let's go to this guy right back here. And I'm going to be throwing things at the crowd, okay? I am really dangerous with these things. They fly way better. No, I'm going to throw them at the people who ask questions. So go ahead, sir.
What do you look for in an artist for your books?
What do I look for in an artist for my books? The artists that I choose are the ones, and by the way, we'll do seating down people first, so you guys can relax your hands, and then I'll go by group, that way, yeah. So I look for really great line art, because I'm choosing the artists in the interior artists. The painters I can ask, but I can't really choose. I don't hire them. All the artists in between the covers are artists I hired myself and paid for the art myself. and commission. This is just something that I feel is very important for books. I wish that we had more art in books. I'm not the only one who wishes this, but I wish that we had more illustrations in novels for big people. All the little people get all the cool illustrations. Ben McSweeney I hired because, and he does Shalon Sketchbook because he did really awesome fan art. And I just called him and said, I need you to be doing some art for a pitch for mine. He did this art for a pitch, turned out really well. I then hired him to work on the Stormlight Archive. Isaac I've known for years. Dan Dos Santos also did art for this, and he has a beautiful cover illustration. For him, I wanted him because he's so good with figures, and I was doing this art that involved a lot of figures that I went to him. So it just really depends on the situation. But a good DeviantArt portfolio with great line art is part of what draws me. All right? Here we are. Let's see if I beam people. Oh, the person next to you. I'm sorry. All right, we're going to go right here to this young lady. Why did I pick a world that had so much emotion? Speaking the Spren, you can't hide emotion. The Parshendi songs. I was looking for a world that would do what I wanted to do to epic fantasy, which was push it beyond the kind of comfortable bounds that it had settled into. I feel like this should be the most imaginative genre possible. You can do anything. And part of what draws us to the genre is the sense of wonder. And if we're always reading the same thing, we lose that sense of wonder. In fact, you will meet a lot of people who, during the same period that I was kind of getting frustrated with the genre, a lot of people who left the genre because they were seeing the same thing too often, which is a shame because it's the genre where you shouldn't see the same thing too often. They were jumping ship to things like Sabriel, Garth Nix at the time, and things like this. They were doing really innovative things with the genre. A lot of them were happening in young adult at that time. There were some great authors right this time. I don't want to imply that everyone. I just read a couple stinkers in a row, and it kind of soured me on the idea. So that's what I'm looking for. I like the idea that from page one, you're seeing the Spren from the prologue of the book, and they are bizarre and different from our experience, and everyone accepts them as a natural part of life, that it tells you this is not our world. This is a bizarrely different world, but I used emotion because we all feel emotions. For a really great book to work, you often, particularly fantasy book, you want to have one foot in the familiar and one foot in the strange. Using something familiar in a strange way, or of taking something strange and making it familiar, is the hallmark of the science fiction and fantasy genre, which then allows us to say, I understand emotion, so I can understand what this feels like, but there's a bizarre side effect in this world which allows some of the sense of wonder to come into it. All right, right here, your hand went up first.
Yes.
Are you wearing, what are you wearing? That's a cool shirt.
Just a dragon.
A dragon? Dragon shirts are awesome.
So you mentioned that you'd already written the last chapter of book 5. You had
Yes.
most of the series planned out.
Yes.
Do you leave yourself any room for
Oh, good question.
inspiration that
Do I
comes
leave
along?
myself any room for inspiration? Here, I'll throw this to you first. I hit the guy too. You should pass that back to him if you would. Sorry, guy, being Jew. The question is, do I leave room for inspiration? I plan so many things. Yes, I do. I think it's very important. I am an outliner in everything except character. I can't outline characters. I found that if I outline characters, I write the life out of them. They follow the plot instead of being who they are. And so characters get veto power on plots. And so as I'm writing a character along, oftentimes what I feel a character has become will not do what the plot says. And so I will then rebuild my entire outline to match who this person has become. I'm getting better and better at making plots that are not so constrictive that a character could go multiple directions and it would still be okay. But at the end of the day, I often am rebuilding my plots to match. And I feel like this gives me the right balance I want in my books, which is the characters feeling alive, and yet with a good plan, you can have a great ending. A lot of the books that have fantastic characters often have weak endings. Because oftentimes writers will write to their characters and let their characters do whatever they want, and then that leads to no planned ending. Which some of those books are fantastic, but this lets me get the balance where I want it to be. All right, the guy right here, the balding guy. Sorry, I couldn't know how to say it otherwise.
My question is, from the time you started writing to now, has there ever been one character that has made an appearance from when you started to now in a different variation of form?
When I started writing, is there a character that's made an appearance from when I started until now in different forms? I would say Dalinar, definitely. He has stayed the same, though. Hoyd has basically stayed the same. He was also in that first book that I wrote. Kaladin's probably gone through the most transformations over the years of who he was and who he became. So, good question. All right, see if I can not hit you. Oh, right behind you. Okay. All right, the lady right here in the front. Yes. Where did the conversation between two specific characters in a wine house, I don't want to give spoilers, come from? It came from my love of the fantasy genre and an admittance. There's this great book, The Tough Guide to Fairyland, that you guys might want to check out, which talks about, and it's not the only one, that talks about certain tropes in fantasy and things that get ignored, that don't get talked about, that really probably should be. Like one of the tropes is nobody wears socks in Fantasyland. No one ever mentions socks. And I like it when socks get mentioned because, you know, things like this, the mundane, doesn't get talked about enough. And so I like to look for places that I can talk about the mundane in my books. All right, we'll go right here.
Can we expect to see all of the oaths by the end
Can
of
we
the
expect to
series?
see all of the oaths by the end of the series? You will see viewpoint protagonists from each of the orders by the end. All right? All right. The gentleman right here.
When you decide, because you've done this in multiple books, and I don't, of course, want to give any spoilers, so when you decide it's time for a character to die,
Right.
why and how do you let go?
Right. How do I decide and why do I decide when a character needs to die? How do I let go? Letting go is actually fairly easy because when it happens in my books, I am prepared for it. I have been planning for it, if not from the beginning, from at least the midpoint of the book or, you know, chapters before it happens. I'm usually aware. And it happens because I don't kill characters because just to kill them. I don't say, who won't they expect me to kill? I think there are authors that do that. I say, what are the risks the character is taking? I can mitigate some of those risks. Is it right for me to do that? At what point do the risks that they're taking catch up to them? At what point do they demand to be allowed to take really, really dangerous risks and potentially pay the consequences? And it's just a matter of feeling the rhythm of the book, what the character demands, and then going through with it. All right? All right, the young lady in the yellow, and we're going to throw this to you. Oh, wow, that was just way off. I'm sorry. All right, the young lady in the yellow. How many books have you worked on in the past year? Let's see. In the past year, I worked on Steelheart. I did the last little work on the Arithmetist. I worked on the Words of Radiance, which finished in December and they published in March, which is crazy. I worked on the Second Legion novella. I worked on the sequel to Steelheart. I began planning for the second Arithmetist, and I began and I built a book guide for a book that I'm probably not going to write for many years, which involves all sorts of funky stuff. So I'm not going to learn that one. All right, here's the thing for you, okay? All right, you ready for this? All right. Oh, that's okay. We'll pass that back. All right, the lady in the blue.
How do you keep all your materials safe without getting leaked out?
How do I keep my materials safe without getting leaked out? The first thing I do is I don't stress about it. If something gets leaked, most of my fans will understand that it's rough. They may enjoy reading it. But I post rough stuff sometimes. Like Warbreaker, I posted chapter by chapter as I wrote it. And this was partially an exercise to get myself to be okay with this idea, just in case something did leak. So if something leaks, I will deal with it. I probably won't be happy because the showman in me wants to have the reveals happen in the right way, and usually my first drafts do not contain the proper balance of foreshadowing for the climaxes that I want to have happen, because I have to get to them, find out if and make sure they work, and then lay down the foreshadowing appropriately, then run it through a writing group, see what they're guessing and what they're not guessing, and then tweak the foreshadowing and potential red herrings in the right way to make it so that as you're reading, my goal is, and this isn't going to work for everybody, but my goal is so that you start to figure out what's going to happen just a little bit before it happens. So that you have that moment of realization, that sort of anticipation, and then the thrill of it actually happening. That means that occasionally one should blindside you, and occasionally you should be able to figure one out pretty early with that balance as I'm doing it. And depending on who you are, you'll spot different things. But hopefully in every book there will be some that you spot, some that you don't spot at all, and the majority of them that you kind of have this realization right before it's happening. And that's what I shoot for in foreshadowing, and that will not be right in the first draft. All right, we're going to throw this. Oh, it almost got you. And now I'm actually going to let this group over here, we're going to go this lady right here, and then we'll do other people standing behind that, and yeah, the standing groups. Go ahead. Yes. When am I going to do the rest of the Mistborn books? The Shadows of Self, which is sequel Alloy of Law, I will do following Stones Unhallowed, which is book 3. Which, by the way, Pat Rothfuss is going to name one of his books, Doors of Stone. So I'm like, do I have to change mine now, or can I just beat it? Yeah, beat him. Yeah. No, I don't want to beat him. I want his book to come out so I can read it. But anyway, that would probably be the year after Stones Unhallowed, and I will probably do the modern day trilogy between books 5 and 6 of the Stormlight Archive, because there is that break in there. It's a natural break point. The science fiction trilogy is a ways off. All right, guy in the cap.
Can you tell us anything about a second book in the Warbreaker?
Second book in Warbreaker. A second book in Warbreaker. Oh, wow. That almost got you. And almost beheaded the person behind you. This is Zeph, so he does things like that. There will be a second book. I can't promise when. It's a ways off. That and any Elantra sequels are a ways off for now. All right? Right here.
So if Hoyt comes to Earth, what differences would you notice?
If Hoyt comes to Earth, what differences would you notice? Well, he would probably only come to Earth if magic started working here, which you would notice immediately. A lot of people ask if Hoyt is me. No, Hoyt is not me. Hoyt is very far off from me. I'm nowhere near as clever as he is. I don't know what differences you notice. There might be, they would be natural world changes and things like that. But he goes to great lengths to not be noticed sometimes. So I would guess that you wouldn't notice him. Right here.
You mentioned about bringing Bridge 4 and Balance.
It's from Dragonsteel, yes.
Have you ever written a character or a plotline and realized, other than that would work better in another setting?
Have I ever written a character or plotline other than those and realized they'd work better in another setting? I do this frequently. Allomancy and Feruchemy were both designed for separate books. I actually wrote those entire books, and the books didn't work, but the magic systems did, and I brought them together for the book. Coincidentally, the book was called Mistborn, one was called The Final Empire, so when I wrote the combination, that's where the title of Mistborn, The Final Empire came from. There is a character from the 2002 version of The Way of Kings, which I wrote an entire book about in another world, and then he makes an appearance in Words of Radiance. But this character started in The Way of Kings 2002, which is kind of fun. All right, where's Waldo over there? Which one of my characters has changed the most in ways I didn't expect? I would say that it's probably Spook, who was not planned to have any major part in the series and ended up having a pretty big one. And that was one of those revisions where I knocked out an entire section of a book and added in a complete viewpoint sequence for him. All right, we're going to do the guy in the red right here.
So, can't remember the name of the world. The world that Dragonsteel and Liar Part now are set on.
Yes, Yolen.
Was that set before or after the break-in?
Liar, that was set before. Okay. So for what he's asking, all of my epic fantasy books are connected. They're taking place in the same universe, and there are continuing characters. But I want to make absolutely clear, you do not need to know any of this to appreciate the books. It is all meant to be cameos at this point. It will be important eventually, but you can read a primer then, all right? Don't feel that you have to read Mistborn to understand Way of Kings or anything like that, all right? All right, we're going to do one more question back here. Oh, and his question is the first book, Dragonsteel, chronologically is the first one. Well, liar part Nell is. Do they take place before the breaking of Aiden Alcyon? And they do. All right, the guy on the way back, the last hand. Yeah, that's you.
Do you ever follow your own writing prompts from writing?
Do I ever follow my own writing prompts from writing excuses? Once in a while, I do. And it's a lot of fun to do so. So yes, I have done that before. All right, you're way back there. See if I can get this to you. Oh! I almost, you ducked really well. All right, we're going to go to the lady in the back right there with the...
You didn't get my card.
Oh, I didn't get the guy in red his card? Oh, guy in red, here you go. Oh, okay. We'll pass that to the guy in red if you would. All right, the lady in the bow. With the bow, is that a bow? Whatever's in your hair, something. Are you standing on somebody? You're cheating. That's good, okay. Yes.
And I was wondering, how do you make the decision? When is magic just magic?
Oh, good question. So how do I make the decision? That's a great question. Between when is magic just magic, when do I use science? I like to balance using magic and science in my books. This is just something that I'm fascinated by. I was originally a chemistry major in college. I like cool magic systems that have 1 foot in science and 1 foot in superstition, which is where my favorite magics that I've read come from. I feel like humans naturally try to explain things, and I'm usually working in an era where they're going to try the scientific method out. Most of my books are happening, at least Renaissance era or post-Renaissance in their equivalent worlds. And so it's just really fun to me to do this. And how do I decide? I just try writing the magic and see if it works. And if it doesn't, I move the balance one way or another. If you're really interested in this, I've written 3 essays called Sanderson's First Law, Second Law, and Third Law, very humbly named, in which I talk about how I design magic systems. And it's not, this is how you should do it, it's simply, here are some rules I follow. All right, here we go. Okay, all right, you're way back there. Oh, it doesn't even, all right, can we pass that back, all the way back there? Oh, this guy's trustworthy. He'll get it back there. He's from Theoryland. They're trustworthy. All right, we're going to go the guy right here with the 3 things on his shirt.
So, how did you decide that Hoyd would be a world hopper and would be connected to all of your books?
How did I decide that Hoyd would be a world hopper and connected to all my books? Hoyd predates the idea of the Cosmere. The very first story I wrote about him was him visiting a planet, trying to figure out how the magic works. So he could just, yeah, and I actually had a sequence of stories. I was a teenager then, writing about this guy visiting other worlds, having to hack their magic system and things like this. And so it became very natural to me to start using him when I built the idea of the Cosmere, which is built around the idea of, I love books that have done this. But I feel that a lot of the ones that I love did it after the fact. Asimov's a good example of this, where he tied everything together. And since he hadn't planned it from the beginning, he did a wonderful job. But since he hadn't planned it from the beginning, there's some little hiccups in tying his worlds together. And I thought, what if somebody did that from the beginning? So once again, I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of somebody who did something awesome and trying to take it a step further. All right. Oh, hey, that almost got to you. All right, we're going to do this guy who's twirling his thing around. Go ahead.
All right. Was there anything you had to cut from the first or second book that you wish you hadn't had to cut?
Is there anything I wished I hadn't cut from the first or second book that I wish I hadn't cut? Oh, that can get, yeah. So far, no. There is nothing that I've cut from either of those books that I wished I hadn't cut. There is one small tweak, which I can tell you when you come up if you read the book, that I kind of wish I'd made to the end of the second book. But there are no deleted sequences that I wish were in the book. That goes against the Wheel of Time, where there are a couple that I kind of wish were still in the books. I wrote a bridal wreath scene where Avi and Elaine and Min weave a bridal wreath for Rand that didn't end up in the book. And it's good that it got cut, because it was balancing all of the fighting that was happening in Camelin, and going to this sort of happy scene did not work as a balance at all, and so the rhythm of the book was way off. But it was one of my favorite scenes in A Memory of Light that had to get up getting dropped for those reasons. So I do wish that one had seen the light of day, but yeah. All right here, yes.
Do you have you said you plan out the series. Do you have a plan to have the next book within the book?
Yes, do I have a plan for the next book within the book?
As in appearing in the book for you?
Yes, I do have a plan. The next one is really cool. It's it's a non-standard book. How about that? When you see it, you're gonna find it really cool. The 5th one is awesome too.
Oh,
All right, we're gonna go to the lady right here with the glasses. Yes.
All right. I don't mean to be that.
Amber Alert.
What's that?
Amber Alert.
Oh, an Amber Alert. That's what's happening. Everyone look at their Amber Alert. No, I'm not laughing. That's something that you
It's in Lebanon.
yeah.
It's kind of close.
All right, go ahead.
I don't mean to be that person, but is the Mistborn video game?
Oh yes, Mistborn video game. Good question. A lot of people are curious about this. Mistborn video game is listed as in development still. I don't know. I wrote a story for it. I don't know when it will come out or if. The goal was to do it like the Infamous series was my plan was something like that, open world-ish, lots of cool powers, Mistborn thing. But I don't know if they'll ever end up actually doing it. And for movies, there is no motion on any of them. So if your uncle's Joss Whedon, give Uncle Joss a call. But there's no motion on anything. Last I heard, Wheel of Time, they were shooting for television show now. Mistborn and Legion lapsed. I still have Emperor's Soul and Steelheart under contract. All right, in the purple. Do I think I would survive in the Stormlight Archive world? I'm kind of squishy. I don't think I would. Oh, that one was... Oh, sorry. Can we pass that back to her? Okay, right here, this guy.
Yeah, I started reading the Alcatraz book with my family together.
Yes.
They're now teenagers. I'm wondering if we'll be able to finish that before college.
Will we be able to finish Alcatraz series before college? Yeah, I bought the rights back from the publisher, and I'm planning to do the 5th book very soon. Tor is re-releasing them next year, so it should be by then. All right, we're going to do this guy who's waving his hand. Yes. Am I going to resize Way of Kings to match Words of Radiance? No, no. I was kind of hoping Words of Radiance would be shorter than Way of Kings, but it is not. All right, in the red. How did I come up with the geography on Roshar? Good question. The geography on Roshar was developed as a natural outgrowth of the High Storm, which was the first concept for Roshar, which was inspired by the Storm of Jupiter, which was me wanting to tell a story about a world with a continual magical storm, and then I built the ecology and all of these things up from that. Roshar had to grow up. I had to find a mechanism by which stone was deposited by rain, because I felt that the constant weathering over that long of a time would leave no continents. And so the creme is my kind of scientific, with 1 foot in magic, hack on keeping the continent. So the continent does drift. They don't have plate tectonics. The continent actually moves as it gets weathered on the east and gets pushed that direction over millennia of time. So that's kind of one of the fun things. All right, the guy right here.
How do you plan on making new series versus continuing books and the ones you already have?
How do I decide between new series and the ones I already have? It just really depends on what I'm feeling like doing. I have a big detailed plan for the Cosmere, but yeah, I will do others, and I can't promise when or what I'll do. It just is when inspiration strikes me. Okay, I'm going to do one more on the way back. The guy went up on his tiptoes.
My question is, how has your writing epic fantasy influenced your work in like a more comic book sense? Like,
oh yeah, like Steelheart and stuff. How has that influenced?
How did writing in more of a comic book sense influence your later epic fantasy novels? Also,
yeah.
Ever make a comic book?
I will make a comic book. I'm trying to take one of the unpublished 13 novels and go back over it, because the dialogue in one of them is pretty good, but if I can just fix some of the plot archetypes, then we'll release that as a graphic novel. White Sand, we're working on doing that for. That's Cosmere, yeah. And so yes, working in the I've read comic books since, I discovered Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the original, when they all had red face masks. None of this Archie Comics version or whatever it was. I've read a lot of comics, and so they've influenced me all along. Wanting to do a comic book themed book is something that I had an idea for years and years. And people told me, you really can't, no one's going to read a comic book themed book. So I just wrote it anyway. But I would say that the biggest thing I practiced in that book that's reflected back is the short pacing of chapters, and using those really tight, narratively short chapters as a method for pushing a reader through the book. It's not something that you'll see translate to the Stormlight Archive very much because I do the chapters very different there, but it is something I liked practicing for that book and something that I think that is a special part of that book. All right, we're going to throw this to you. This is the last one. By the way, is anyone in costume? You're in costume. You get one. We'll get one to you. Oh, sorry. And we will get one to this guy back here. Well, is there Wayne back there? All right. We're going to get this one to the guy who asked the question.
One.
Okay, someone get that to him. All right, we have a Wayne, kind of, and we have someone in the way back. Who's in the way back? Yeah? When you come through, I'm going to throw you one right now, but I'll see your costume when you come through. Oh, someone got down. Really smart. Someone ducked. All right, here it goes. Oh, with the baby. Good idea. Okay, all the way over there. All right, so the last one, the hat person, are you? Oh, right here. Yes, all right, that'll do. There you are. Oh, dude, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I'm all right. All right, good. Okay.
Taking one for the team.
Taking one for the team. You're awesome. Thank you. Okay, so I am now going to do a few quick announcements, then I'll do the reading, and then we'll do the actual signing. And I've got my list of announcements right here. The first one is, once I finish with this, I will hurriedly pre-sign a bunch of copies of Words of Radiance. If you bought your book here and you need to leave, you can swap, and you'll have one signed already. Is that okay with you guys? So just make sure your book's in pristine condition still, and you can swap it and not have to wait in line. It'll be pre-signed. We are going to pass Post-its out. You're going to post-it your books. Write your name or the name you want the book for, and every book you want personalized. You can have up to 3 of those, okay? 3 personalizations, and I will sign as many more as you want. If you want more than 3 personalizations, I'll ask you to wait to the end, okay? So 3, and so what I want you to do, if someone will hand me a copy of one of the hardcovers here, I'm going to show you where to put that Post-it when you get it. And they're going to be helping you with this, and this is for you also. So I want you to open it up to the full title. That's the title page with my name on it. See? This is the full title, right? And then I want you to take the flap of the book, and I want you to flap it like this as a bookmark, so when we open it, it opens up right there. It's really cool. You don't have to do that for paperbacks because they don't have a flap. When you get your Post-it, stick it on the left side on the jacket, not on the front, because that's where I sign. If you put it like right here over the title, I actually write your name right there and things like this. So don't put it there, put it on this side. And when you do it, if it matters to you, try to make sure that the Post-it doesn't go over and stick to the page also, because then when you close your book, you'll fold your page, right? Because you just put a piece of tape across it, basically. And so that's just something to keep in mind for how we do that. So that's, this was over here, yes. So that's how you flap your books, and they'll be helping you with that. We will let you take pictures. Pictures, I want to make, we were going to have a guy, where's the guy? The guy's right here. You're going to give your camera to this guy. Have your camera out and ready. We'll do the picture the first thing. So what you're going to do is you'll hand your books probably to this guy. He'll hand it to me. I'm going to start signing. Then you can explain how your camera works. You can get positioned. We can do all that stuff. He'll count to 3, and I'll look up. It's really fun. You'll watch me. I'm like a dog that's been trained with the bell, right? And this I do so I don't spend all this time staring at him. I would rather be chatting with you and signing your books. And you will be able to ask questions when you come through, so that's perfectly all right, okay? Let's see. This is probably going to go a while. If you haven't been to one of these before, they said they give out till E. Was that right? So the E wristbands, D and E, you may want to go get dinner. Okay? The bookstore doesn't close till 11. I guarantee I'll be here till 10. I will not leave before 10. So if you're stressed about going, this means you can leave. You've got 2 hours if you're an E, probably a D also. You can go browse the store. You can go get dinner. You may be able to catch a movie. Whatever you want to do. If you're back here by 10, I will sign your book. I promise you will not. I will not leave without you. Your book getting signed. It's likely I'll be here till 11, but I can't promise that. I will promise 10 o'clock, okay? So just keep that in mind. You're more than welcome to do that. I do also want to give some applause for the store. I appreciate them having me in. I appreciate them having this space for us. I know that sometimes books are a little bit cheaper and other places online sometimes, but online stores can't do this. This is why we like these stores. And Words of Radiance, let's be honest, it was like 40% off at your store. So it's really hard to find it cheaper if you're a Barnes & Noble member than right here. But if you brought your books in, that's okay. I would ask you to consider supporting the store. Next time you want a book, come here and get it. Or if there's a gift you're looking for, you know, browse the store during this time. I'm sure they have lots of my backlist titles, like my teen books.
No.
They're sold out. They do not have lots of my backlist titles. They have nothing, apparently. So go buy someone else's book. Yeah. Go Scalzi's books. So right here, just an aside, I wasn't planning to tell the story, but I was on my way to Worldcon, and I stopped in the store, the airport bookstore, as I often do, and I was trying to get someone to buy my books, as I often do. And he said, I'm not really interested in fantasy, I really want a science fiction. So I'm like, all right, this John Scalzi book is actually really good, and I told him about Old Man's War and how it was awesome, and the guy went and bought it. And so I tweeted, what have I done? I just sold a Scalzi book. Because Scalzi and I have this fake rivalry. And so when I got to Worldcon, I was walking by and I heard a, hey Sanderson! And it was John Scalzi, and he threw 50 cents at me. And he said, your royalties! All right, the last announcement is, if you have a child 4 and under, or if you are a senior citizen and you would like to come to the front of the line, come talk to these people. I would invite you to be able to come to the front of the line. Same goes for someone who's disabled. I once had someone in crutches wait 2 hours in line to talk to me. Feel free. So the ducking baby dude, feel free. And we'll get through those first. All right, time for the reading. This is going to be about 10 minutes long. It's a little shorter than that, actually. And it is something unpublished. Oh. Yes. I like to do readings from unpublished works because I figure you've all got the books that you came to buy. You don't want to hear me read those. You want to hear me read ones that you can't buy. And so this is the short story that I worked on in between Words of Radiance and Steelheart. It is Cosmere, and it's a little bit more expository than a final draft would be. I just want to warn you, it is first draft, okay? So, Ilyel was awakened by the whispering of the dead child who followed him. The girl's words were often gibberish, though usually he could make out a few of them. Tonight, he didn't even understand a single one, which made the whispering even more eerie. Ilyel sat up in his cot, realizing that he'd fallen asleep in his uniform again, and looked across the darkened room, seeking out the child. There, she hid in the shadows by the wooden bin that held his canes. Small, maybe 4 years old, she had long, straight blonde hair that hung down by her face, ears peeking out like rocks in the sand. She met his eyes. She whispered. It would be nice when this particular echo passed. Ilyel rose, tugging at his rumpled jacket, still enough a soldier to feel ashamed at its state. His father would have had Ilyel's head if he'd seen such a uniform. Climbing from the bed, Ilyel took the cane from beside it for support, then walked out onto the balcony. He put his back to the dead child. She was a figment, an echo, or a side effect from an incubation he'd done a few years back. That was so long ago that he was losing hope that this echo would ever fade. He might be stuck with the hallucination for good. He stepped out onto the balcony, using the cane by habit, though he was currently strong enough that he didn't need it to walk. He was recovering from his incubation of 2 months back, the grind of that one having finally worn off. In fact, he was probably too strong. He'd been getting too much sleep lately, been eating too well. He needed to maintain a certain level of physical weakness so he'd be open to incubations, assuming he wanted to remain effective in his duties. And he did want to remain effective, if for his own reasons, if not for the Corps. Outside on the balcony, the sky burned. It smoldered high above, deep red lines, the color of a serpent's tongue, glowing like rips in the air. The glowing magma cast a warm red light across the city of Sui Mokt. As always, the air smelled faintly of smoke, though he only noticed that when he first stepped out of the building. He knew, logically, that the burning place he saw above was actually the ground. He knew that Sui Mocht flew in the air, a city reversed, one of the few bastions of life left in the burning land. Ilyel was the one who was upside down, as were all of the city's inhabitants. It didn't feel that way to him. He lived here too long. Upward was toward the burning ground of the land. Downward was toward the sky and the sun, things he never saw except on the rare occasion when he was called upon to visit the farms and orchards that grew on the city's sunward side. Ilyel stood for a time, holding to the cast iron railing, staring up at the swaths of burning ground high above, molten rivers, a land destroyed. A warning flag raised to them all, omnipresent and undeniable. The city itself slept beneath that scarlet glare, bathed in red. The girl whispered from behind. She crawled to the balcony doorway and now crouched there, looking up at the air. Ilyel glanced at her. Kareen's gaze, you're a creepy one, he whispered. What must I do to be rid of you? She whispered. He tapped his finger on the railing, then strode back into his quarters, splashed some water on his face, and checked the sword blade of his walking cane. Seconds later, he was out the door. 2. The offices of the Corps didn't look like a police station should. A police station was supposed to be a box-like thing, stable and functional, designed to indicate to all who visited that this was not a place where nonsense was permitted. Those ornamented columns etched with the silver serpents of Mochdi lore. Sorry, lost my place. Those golden doors, those soldiers with ridiculous feathered helms, those were not the symbols of efficient law-keeping. In his mind, they were quite the opposite. Ilyel walked up the steps toward the guards, who were at least armed with functional halberds and 2 flintlock pistols at their belts. They saluted him by lifting fists to their sides. As an incubator, he outranked everyone in this building except the ones who actually mattered. Ilyel felt a moment of lightheadedness near the top of the steps and was forced to stop, gripping the railing and leaning on his cane. So he wasn't completely well. Good. Neither guard stepped to help him. Weakness was expected of incubators, one of the marks of their station, and being near them at the wrong time could be dangerous. One needed only look upward at the burning land to be reminded of how dangerous. When his head cleared, he continued up the steps, cane clicking, and past the men without returning their salute. He stopped just inside the building, however, coming alert. Motion. Lesser watchmen calling to one another in the large room, aides carrying large stacks of paper. Reddened eyes and yawns accompanied both groups. Many of these people had been called up unexpectedly, despite the very early hour. Ilyel? A woman rushed up to him through the bustle. Kua wore the yellow and blue uniform of an incubator, like his own, but better fitting and far better kept. You look like Ash, man, she said. Aren't you still on grind leave? Ilyel looked back at the hall, reading the motion of bodies. Nobody was going into the weapons locker, though riot gear had been set out to the side. They were getting ready for something, but they didn't know what yet. A prophecy, he guessed. I still can't believe they called you up, Kua said. You deserve some relaxation after... I will visit Patsipa, Ilyel said, striding through the room, leaving Kua behind. He tried not to let himself get carried away in the chaos. The event he'd been waiting for would come eventually, but this might not be it. Patsipa made prophecies with some frequency. That was why the Corps maintained her and why she carried her terrible burden. It was difficult not to feel tense, however, in the room's frenzy. Nearby, a scribe turned and accidentally knocked over an hourglass, smashing it to the floor, spraying sand. He spared the sand a glance, it always drew his attention, but otherwise ignored it, focused on a set of doors at the back of the room. This must have been an alarming prophecy indeed to cause such a fuss. The guards here at the doors were even more flowery, with feathers on their shields after an old-fashioned style almost nobody used any longer. The murals might depict men like this, wearing simple wraps, and women in nothing above the waist but necklaces, but those days had passed long ago, centuries before Ilyel's time. The Mochdi people were now as modern a one as he had ever known. His own brownish tan skin and dark hair blended in here well enough that he could have passed for Mochdi himself, assuming he didn't open his mouth. That was something he'd never been good at doing. These guards let him pass too, and no scribes or watchmen beset him in the hallway beyond. Only incubators were allowed in here. Unfortunately, while they presented a more solemn group, it was no less unruly in its own right. Some 24 of them clumped together at the other end of the darkened hallway like a clot of hair in a drain. Ilyel strode forward, passing doors on either side set with glass. The small, well-lit rooms beyond weren't exactly cells, just like their occupants weren't exactly prisoners. They just couldn't leave. With the hallway dark and the rooms lit, each door's window glowed. It was like they looked into other worlds inhabited by the sick. It was hard to think of it that way anymore after so long in this land. The people in those rooms weren't simply ill, they were lay incubators. Their job was to live in those little rooms, bearing their afflictions until they started to recover, whereupon another individual would be brought in to catch their malady and take their place, ensuring that the incubation itself didn't vanish. It was good money, assuming you didn't mind discomfort, which could range from the sniffles to the deadly fevers, depending on which incubation you agreed to receive. And of course, there were other benefits. In one room he passed, the occupant, a young man, hovered in the air reading a book. In another, an elderly woman tapped on a cup, idly changing the color of the liquid inside with each tap. And so he mocked, indeed upon this entire land, every disease also granted a special capacity. That ability lasted as long as the ailment did. Many of these blessings were minor, while others were grand. Some few were very, very dangerous. Hence the existence of the incubators and of the core. So there you go. I hope to finish that someday. It's not done yet, but you will eventually be able to read it. I'm going to now let Barnes & Noble take over. I wanted to thank you guys one more time. I look forward to talking to you as you come through the line.